there's something you need to hear. The loneliness you've been carrying was never random. It had a deeper purpose. It wasn't something that just happened while life ignored you. It was doing something the entire time, shaping what stays and what doesn't, even when it didn't make sense. And now that phase is ending, which means you're about to see something most people never stop to question, because not all loneliness is the same. And if you don't understand which type of loneliness you've been living in, you won't recognize why things are about to change. There's more than one way to be alone, and if you don't recognize which one you've been living in, you end up misreading your own situation. Some people are alone simply because no one is around them. That's the most visible kind. It's situational, and it usually changes once life shifts, new environments, new routines, new people. Others are surrounded by people and still feel invisible, like they're present, but never truly seen or understood. That kind runs deeper because it's not about being alone physically, it's about not being met on the level that actually matters. And then there's another type that shows up in a quieter way. It's when things almost happen, where conversations feel like they're building into something real, but never fully get there, where people get close enough to recognize you, but not close enough to stay, where moments feel like they could turn into something meaningful, but they don't quite settle into anything solid. And each of these experiences can feel completely different, but they all lead to the same question. Why does it feel like something is missing? That's where most people get it wrong. They treat all loneliness the same, as if it means they're disconnected, overlooked, or behind in some way. But that's not always true. Loneliness isn't a single experience. It's a signal, and what it's telling you depends on the form it takes. And once you start seeing the difference, you stop reacting to it the same way. You stop assuming something is wrong and start paying attention to what it's actually pointing toward. This isn't happening randomly, and it's not happening early for a reason. Shifts like this don't arrive all at once. They build, they press, they accumulate until there's no space left for them to stay internal. What you're feeling around the 25th is that pressure. It's the moment where something is clearly forming but hasn't fully shown itself yet. And then the 26th is where it crosses that line, where what was internal starts becoming visible, tangible, undeniable. There's a very specific reason for that. On the 26th, the moon aligns with Jupiter, and that alignment is what's driving this shift. The moon governs emotional connection, closeness, how you bond with people on a real level. Jupiter expands whatever it touches. It doesn't create, it amplifies. It takes what's already there and pushes it outward. So when these two come together, emotional energy doesn't stay contained anymore. It moves, it spreads, it reaches. Whatever has been building quietly doesn't stay quiet when expansion hits it. That's why this moment matters. Not because something new suddenly appears out of nowhere, but because what's been forming beneath the surface finally has the conditions to come out. And that's when things start to feel different in a very real way. You might notice yourself being more open to interaction without forcing it. Conversations happen more naturally. There's less hesitation, less overthinking, less resistance when it comes to letting people in. Even unexpected interactions can start to happen. People reaching out, small conversations turning into something more, connections forming without effort. It won't feel dramatic in the way people expect. It won't feel like a sudden event. It will feel natural, almost too natural, like something that should have already been happening. But that's the point. Here's the part most people won't admit even to themselves. You can want connection, and still be the reason it doesn't fully land. Not in an obvious way, not by rejecting people or pushing them away directly. It's much more subtle than that. It shows up in hesitation, in holding back just enough to stay safe, in leaving conversations early, emotionally or mentally, before they have the chance to deepen, in assuming how something will end before it even has the chance to begin. And the most dangerous part is, it feels like protection. It feels like you're being careful, like you're avoiding disappointment, like you're just waiting for the right situation. But what's actually happening is this: you're staying just out of reach of real connection while still believing you're open to it. That's the hidden wall. It's not visible, it's not obvious, and it doesn't feel like resistance. But it creates just enough distance to turn something real into another almost. Some people don't lose connection because it wasn't there. They lose it because they never fully stepped into it. And this is where everything starts to shift. Because once that wall weakens, even slightly, everything that's been trying to reach you suddenly has somewhere to land. The timing is already in place. The expansion is already happening. So now the only question that matters is whether you stay in that half step back, or whether, for the first time, you actually let something meet you fully. One of the biggest frustrations people carry is the feeling that they gave too much to the wrong people, that they invested time, attention, care, and effort into connections that didn't last or didn't return what was given. It feels like loss. It feels like something was taken and never replaced. But that's not actually what happened. What you gave didn't disappear. It didn't vanish into nothing. It built something inside you that you didn't have before. Every time you tried to understand someone, you sharpened your ability to read people. Every time you cared, and it wasn't met properly, you developed a clearer sense of what real connection should feel like. Every time something didn't work, you refined your awareness of what does. That's not wasted energy, that's accumulated precision. The wrong people didn't take anything from you, they revealed how much you actually have to give. And that matters more than most people realize. Because the next connection you step into doesn't start from zero. It doesn't begin at the level you were at before. It begins with everything you've already built, everything you've already learned, everything you've already become capable of. That's why it feels different. Not because the other person is magically perfect, but because you're no longer showing up in the same way you used to. You're more aware, more grounded, more selective without even trying to be. You don't ignore things you used to overlook, and you don't chase things that don't meet you anymore. And that changes everything. Because now, when something real starts to form, you don't dilute it. You don't overextend. You don't lose yourself trying to hold on to it. You meet it properly. Real connection doesn't require you to give more. It requires the other person to finally be able to receive what you already give. That's the difference. Everything that felt like it went nowhere was actually building towards something that hasn't happened yet. It was preparing you to experience a connection that doesn't collapse under the weight of what you bring to it. And once you see it that way, the past stops looking like a series of mistakes and starts looking like a very specific kind of preparation that most people never go through deeply enough. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. Don't lose hope, you never know what tomorrow brings. It's simple, but it's real. Not everything is meant to be figured out today. Some things change overnight. Some things shift when you least expect it. And the truth is, tomorrow doesn't ask for perfection. It just asks that you're still here to meet it. Hope isn't always loud or confident. Sometimes it's just deciding not to give up yet. Thank you for sharing this reminder. There's a point people reach where they say they're ready for something real, but without realizing it, they've quietly closed themselves off in ways that feel completely justified. not in an obvious way, not by saying, "I don't want connection," but by staying guarded just enough to stay safe. It shows up in small decisions, holding back certain thoughts, not fully expressing interest, keeping emotional distance even when things feel right, waiting for the other person to prove everything first before allowing yourself to step forward. And all of that feels reasonable. It feels like you've learned from the past, like you're protecting yourself from repeating the same experiences, like you're finally being careful. But there's a problem with that. The same walls that protect you from being hurt also prevent you from being fully seen. You can't experience a real connection while staying half hidden inside it. That's where most people get stuck without realizing it. They've done all the internal work. They've developed awareness. They've refined themselves. They've become more selective. But when the moment actually arrives, they hesitate just enough to keep things from fully forming, not because they don't want it, but because they're used to holding back. And this is where everything shifts. At some point, something shifted in you, and it didn't feel dramatic when it happened, but the effects are obvious now. You don't engage the same way anymore. Conversations that used to hold your attention now feel repetitive. Interactions that once felt exciting now feel empty halfway through. It's not that people suddenly became worse, it's that your tolerance for surface-level connection quietly disappeared. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand themselves. They start thinking they've become too distant, too selective, too hard to connect with. They question whether they're pushing people away or expecting too much. But that's not what's happening here. You're not rejecting connection. You're rejecting connection that doesn't go anywhere. Once you've experienced depth, surface-level interaction stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like distraction. That's the difference. You can still talk, laugh, and engage, but there's a clear point where it stops holding your interest because there's nothing underneath it. No real exchange, no real understanding, no sense that something meaningful is building. And once you notice that, you can't unsee it. Even if you tried to go back to how you used to interact, it wouldn't feel right anymore. It would feel forced. It would feel like you're lowering yourself into something that no longer matches where you are. And this is exactly why your environment starts to change, not because you're actively cutting people off or making drastic decisions, but because the things that used to hold your attention simply don't anymore. You stop investing in what doesn't feel real, and naturally, those connections fade without effort. That's not loss. That's filtration. The moment you stop entertaining what feels empty is the moment space opens for something that doesn't. And that space matters, because deeper connections don't form in environments filled with distractions and half-engaged interactions. They require presence, attention, and a level of clarity that only exists when you're no longer dividing yourself across things that don't matter. So what you're experiencing right now isn't you becoming difficult, it's you becoming specific. When this actually begins to happen, it's not going to feel the way people imagine it will. It's not going to feel like a sudden rush of excitement or some overwhelming moment where everything instantly makes sense. In fact, the first feeling is often the opposite of what you expect. It feels unfamiliar. There's a kind of quiet confusion that comes with it because for so long you've been used to things almost working, almost landing, almost becoming something real. So when something starts to feel stable, consistent, and naturally aligned, your first reaction isn't always excitement, it's hesitation. You start questioning it. You wonder if it's real, if it's going to last, if it's just another situation that looks promising in the beginning and fades later. Not because anything is wrong, but because your past experiences trained you to expect that pattern. Getting what you've been asking for can feel just as unfamiliar as not having it. That's the adjustment. You're not just stepping into a new connection, you're stepping into a new experience of connection, one that doesn't follow the same unstable rhythm you're used to. And because of that, it takes a moment for your mind to catch up to what's actually happening. You might find yourself double-checking things that don't need to be checked, over-analyzing moments that are actually simple, looking for signs that something is off when nothing is. But that initial disbelief isn't a bad sign. It's actually one of the clearest indicators that this is different. Because when something is familiar, you don't question it. You fall into it automatically. When something is new in a real way, your system takes time to recognize that it's safe, that it's stable, that it doesn't need to be handled the same way as before. And once that adjustment happens, everything starts to settle. You stop second-guessing, you stop looking for problems that aren't there. You start experiencing the connection for what it actually is, instead of filtering it through what you've been through before. One of the biggest misconceptions people carry is that real connection is supposed to feel intense from the beginning, like something overwhelming, fast-moving, almost chaotic. There's this expectation that if it's real, it should pull you in immediately, create emotional spikes, make you feel like you're losing control in a good way. But that's not actually how aligned connection feels. What you've experienced before might have had intensity, but it also came with confusion. It came with mixed signals, overthinking, moments of certainty followed by doubt, highs that didn't last, and lows that didn't make sense. That kind of intensity feels powerful in the moment, but it doesn't hold. It creates movement, but not stability. What's coming next is different in a way that might surprise you at first. It's calm, not boring, not empty, but steady. There's no constant questioning, no need to analyze every interaction, no feeling like you have to figure out where you stand. Things make sense without effort. Conversations flow without needing to be managed. You don't feel like you're trying to maintain something, it maintains itself. Real connection doesn't create emotional spikes. It removes emotional confusion. That's the shift. Instead of wondering how the other person feels, you'll know. Instead of trying to interpret actions or read between the lines, things will be clear. There won't be a constant back and forth between certainty and doubt because there's nothing unstable underneath it. And this is where people sometimes get thrown off, because when you're used to intensity, calm can feel unfamiliar. It can feel like something is missing simply because you're not experiencing that usual emotional turbulence. But what's actually missing is the instability you've mistaken for depth in the past. This kind of connection doesn't demand your energy to keep it going. It doesn't require constant effort to sustain. It exists in a way that feels natural, almost obvious, like it was always supposed to happen this way. The right connection doesn't pull you in and throw you off balance. It meets you where you already stand. That's how you'll recognize it. For a long time, connection may have felt like something you had to earn. Not in an obvious way, but in subtle patterns that kept repeating. Feeling like you had to stand out, prove your value, show that you were worth someone's time and attention. Feeling like you had to do more, be more, or somehow position yourself in a way that made you undeniable. And even when it wasn't direct competition, it still felt like you were being compared. Like there were other options, other people, other possibilities, and you had to make sure you were the one who stood out enough to be chosen. That creates a very specific kind of pressure. Because when connection feels like something you have to compete for, you're never fully at ease inside it. There's always a part of you that's aware of the possibility of being replaced, overlooked, or not chosen at all. But what's coming next doesn't operate like that. There's no competition, not because you're trying harder or doing something differently, but because the connection itself doesn't involve comparison. You won't have to convince someone to see your value. You won't have to position yourself in a certain way to keep their attention. You won't have to question whether you're enough. The choice will already be made. And if you're still here, still watching, I genuinely appreciate that. The right things don't enter your life loudly. They enter your life clearly. And once that clarity shows up, you won't have to question it. So as you move forward from here, keep it simple. Stay open enough to receive, grounded enough to recognize what's real, and patient enough to let things unfold the way they're meant to. You're not where you were anymore, and what's coming will make that very clear.